Well, thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. That's much appreciated. It's always a challenge to write war poems that will be worthy of the dead and the bereaved, and this one took many months to come. It's called Under These Skies. We were told that in the sky above us are angels, and above the angels is God in heaven. But in the skies above Gaza, we do not hear the flutter of wings, only whirring of drones and bombers that fly and kill. The graves of 7 October are shrouded in the grieving of the bereaved and memories of pogroms, and are outnumbered, utterly dwarfed by the graves of Gaza. Their mounds of rubble were blocks of flats, sandwiches of rubble with pieces of human beings, unburied, rotting, Guernicas and Dresdens, myriads huddled in tents and ruins, orphans of collateral damage, expelled from camps to camps. From these skies, the angels have fled, and God is AWOL. The next poem I will do is an elegy for a species, and there's a bit of a backstory to this poem. By the 1980s, the Brenton blue butterfly was only found at Brenton and no more at Betty's Bay or Nature's Valley. And then a property developer started building holiday houses on the last site the butterflies were at. So Panna Jordan, then Minister of Environmental Affairs in 1997, nationalized that hillside as Africa's sole butterfly reserve in an attempt to save the Brenton blue butterflies. But his term in the cabinet ended, and by 2006, another minister, Lindiwe Sisulu, said, quote, "We cannot forever be held hostage by butterfly eggs that have been laid because environmentalists would care about those things," unquote. And so this elegy is called The Eggs of a Butterfly. Deed of sale, rezoning, subdivision. The butterflies trembled, the bulldozers smirked. The Brenton Blues cried out, "Comrade Pallo, help our pregnant sisters, heavy with egg." The cement mixers poured. The millionaires frolicked for 2 weeks each year. The cement stayed 52 weeks each year. Pseudo-Tuscan killed all that was green except Miami palm and Euro pine. Our air ceased to breathe, ceased to glitter. Our air saw no flutter of wing. I've twice in my life written a cycle of cancer poems. The first cycle about lymphoma and radiotherapy. The second cycle about myeloma and chemotherapy. So this is a selection of a few poems from the cycle. Buying time. There's a commotion outside my front door. A discovery actuary with a smartphone, a medical researcher, a hematologist, and the Grim Reaper with side, all arguing about who is first in my queue. You're just an interested spectator. Next poem is called The Queue. You enter the hospital, walk past the life-size statue of Vincent Pallotti, turn right in the labyrinth at the alcove statue of Christ as Shepherd. Walk past the niche statue of Mary holding the infant. Walk past the unlocked doors of the chapel, where the Bible on the altar is open at a page in the book of Job. walk through the doors marked Oncology Department, and walk past the green line marked Radiotherapy patients turn to the right. You reach the chemotherapy queue. The next poem is about the chemotherapy ward. It's called You're a Big Drip. 14 patients are seated in chairs, all women except you, all middle-aged to elderly. 1 meter above us, shining translucent in the fluorescent lights, drip bags hang like aerial jellyfish. Thanks to gravity, each drips into a thick tube which leads to a catheter that passes through an Alaris pump, periodically making bop, bop noises and flashing a red light, readout bleeping, infusion complete. 4 times, bags are discarded into a tray for a new one. Next poem is called Sisters' Notes. Almost all the sisters and 1 brother have purple epaulets. 2 have white. They search the back of your hands for usable veins, hoping to succeed first time. Sisters' Notes start with the remark, patient walked unaided into unit and made himself comfortable. No impairment. This is unusual, remarkable enough to be noted. Other columns are for an inventory of 5 medicines infused. When the session ends, you walk out into bright light. That ends that cycle. The next poems, I suppose, are about age in a sense. One is called Voting. Every 2.5 years, a purple dot appears on the glacier of my thumbnail. In 4.5 months, it reaches the glacier's end and melts into the sea. If you don't trim your thumbnail, you can keep your new friend a fortnight longer. The next poem is called Haircut. The barber guides her electric razor, and onto the black sheets tumble clumps of my hair, now white as the driven snow. This hair must have come from a cold region, maybe ice crystals from Antarctica, lying forlornly, blown into sarsaparilla on these black sheets. I remember it used to be brown, then grey after my detention, but now it's the whitest part of me, invoking someone transcendent and something eternal. The next poem is a true story, also it's called Hold Up at the Poetry Reading. This evening's guest poet is a celebrity for her poems on nature and animals. Tonight the theme is Touching the Wild. Towards the end of the evening, 2 tall thieves with a gun barge in, grab the woman's bags and drive off. This pub is called appropriately A Touch of Madness, and the kind of madness swirled in and intruded, touching the wild. Since that incident, Off the Wall has now gone completely digital on Zoom and doesn't have live readings, and the pub has gone out of business as such a man as I hope. It's no longer there. Now, 40 years ago, or 4 decades ago, I was detained in the 1985 state of emergency and brought out a collection of poems called Emergency Poems, a pun on it, which collected many of the poems that I recited at political rallies all over the Cape Flats in the 1980s, and for which I was awarded the Order of Ikhamanga in silver. And the state of emergency decree, regulation 3(1), empowered the government to detain anybody who irritated it. So my first poem in the cycle is called 3 hakkies ear. The door knocked. Yellow Jackson, white golf. 5 a.m. 6 armed milkmen put me in the jug. 6 valets with pistols rifle my wardrobe. 6 Liberians with revolvers bring order to my bookshelves. 6 macho suitors, guns in their holsters, proposition me. No regularities, 3 hakkies earn. Come with me and see my hakkies. Well, you can tell 4 decades is a long time. We no longer have Latins and we no longer have milkmen. So that poem is historic. The next poem describes being admitted to Parsma prison and the taking of fingerprints. Descent into necropolis. These guardians of the underworld. This ceremony of the antechamber. They baptize me for their afterlife. M4 streep 85. They anoint my hands in printer's ink and join my epidermis. Leave your autograph. My sarcophagus, 2 by 2.5 meters. Thickness of its walls from the fingertip to the elbow. The inner lid, 5 rods of steel. The outer lid, a metal slab, sealed 14 hours a day. My first day in prison was followed by the first night in prison, and I was struck there by what happened. On dark, the prison's orange floodlights came on, shone through the window, broken up by the 5 bars in the window, and so 5 orange stripes appeared on the wall of the cell opposite from the window. Then, much later on in the night, the moon rose, and from a different angle, it shone a silver light into the cell, leaving 5 stripes of silver light on the opposite wall. So this poem is called First Night. On my first night, I saw the moon. Dennis Brutus only saw the stars once in 3 years. Brayton Breitenbach only saw the moon once in 7 years. But on my first night, through the 6 window slits of cell C250, through the jail floodlights which lash 5 orange wheels on the left wall, 5 orange wheels on the right wall, the moon anoints me with silver photons. 6 silver banners on parade, half-mast, slow march across the wall, signal, strength, endure the night. The moon holds vigil over the captive. And this poem describes my surroundings. The first circle, a corridor. Robin Peterson, Congregationalist minister, Hedeveld, cell C249, puts newcomers at ease, reads Luke. Gottfried Kraus, Lutheran pastor, Mitchell's Plain, cell 251, each sunrise chants the creed. And with Charles Villavicencio, Methodist cleric, UCT professor, cell 263, analyzes, was the barman confession adequate? Now, in the bad old days, as being a police state, we had political censorship, which banned anything that annoyed the government under Section 47(2)(e). And now that we're a democracy, we are quite free from censorship, thankfully. And this poem is called Prejudicial to the Peace and Good Order. The Minister of Trochaic Affairs snarled, I don't like what your poem declares. Your iambic pentameters exceed my parameters. Section 47(2)(e), UN snares. So that is some historic poems from the 1980s. And now I'd like to turn to my most recent collection called Cosmonauts Do It in Heaven, which is poems about astronomy space flight. The first poem I've selected is to celebrate Elmer Sperry and Herman Onsch's Kampfer, who invented the gyro compass. And this made possible the bank and turn indicator in every airliner. That is an artificial horizon to guide the pilot when flying through clouds. A standing ovation for the Donster precision, the gyro compass. Ballet trio who operates on 3 axes, spin doctor tubed, pilot who never loses her balance through vermilion of fog and vertigo, airborne Ariadne, your life-saving hands hold taut the golden thread of an unseen horizon. And in this cycle of poems called The Navigator, there's a poem about Edbel Bruno, who helped calculate the trajectory for a Japanese space probe called Haiten, which flew around the Earth and the Moon and released a sub-probe called Hagurama. 1990, a muse flew up from Tanegashima, turned into chrysanthemum that circles Earth and Moon. Haiten, heaven flyer, set free a Hagurama, who flew solo, moon of our moon. While Haiten, on wings choreographed by Bel Bruno, spiraled wider to the fuzzy boundary of infinity. So changing her course as migrating wild geese, she soared up to take the watch in the higher sky. So that was the poem, The Navigators. The next poem is Alias, We Demand Physics. This poem is a true story about Cape Town High School on the Cape Flats during the 1970s. It's called We Demand Physics. When the stars fled Cape Town, the astronomers followed. While stars hide in light, we can only see them in the brightest dark. We who serve the stars left Hartleysville floodlights, smog and sky glow to astrologers, while astrology thrives on opaqueness. Starlight and irony bathe the Sutherland Karoo copy. A descendant of British Admiralty now precedes to this desert hill. Tonight, astronomy looks up. Freddie Moran, night assistant, checks spinning red dials, green screens, keyboards his commands to electronic eye, remembers. Belleville South High School didn't teach physics. We demanded physics, 11 of us, 10 boys, 1 girl. So our maths teacher, Jan Percents, did the job. In such ways, the stars help their friends win small victories on the ground. And later, Jan Percents went on to become maths professor at the University of the Western Cape. Next poem, which we who are not animals, and two. And let's put it wrong. It's 37. We who are not angels. We who are not angels, nor born with wings, nor tithe of virtue for ascension to heaven. We had only slide rules, now software. We who turn equation into turbo pump, who craft metal to take flight. We who gave birth to the impossible, a pulse of fire soaring, a glint of light. That's the praise for the engineers involved. The next poem is an elegy to the 7 astronauts who died when the Space Shuttle Challenger blew up in 1986. These are the laws of physics, immutable as those of the Medes and Persians. You, frailness of flesh and skin, wrapped in only blueprints and hope, to plunge through furnace of plasma, burning, blasted, luminous beyond Mach molten, torn molecules pink and purple, cremating you as satty to the sky. if all goes well, you shall fly as a butterfly bolted to a bullet. If not, your only grave shall be Schlieren lines across a shocked sky. To stranger, your death shall be as beautiful as fireworks, but to those who knew you, grief, they vanished, became sky, a rain of metal tears upon the land. Watching, that contrail became a cenotaph, a wreath we laid on our voyage to worlds. Then in 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia orbited the Earth for 17 days, and in its descent, a wing melted, it disintegrated. All 7 astronauts were killed, including an Israeli, Ilan Ramon. But the Israeli's diary and his cloth Star of David incredibly fluttered 60 kilometers down through the air to Earth and landed on the ground next to a small Texas town called Palestine. So there is a tragedy, pathos, and irony to challenge as poets. And this energy is called the Star of David fell from heaven. It's also, of course, a metaphor for something else. This lance of fire, this blowtorch of plasma, these crematoria hands of Mach 19 tore one wing of an angel. We fell off Jacob's ladder. So this diary, this cloth Star of David, orphaned. Till then, Packers, it's all in our draft agreement on the rescue of astronauts and the return of astronauts. Dear Colonel, we regret that your 17-day visa for heaven has expired. As to the yellow star, immediately it will be torn from your chest and will emigrate to the sky. As to your blue star, immediately it will be torn from your chest and will repatriate you to the earth. Tumbling, we fluttered 60 kilometers down. We stumbled onto the earth next to Palestine. Now, in space navigation, if one body is circling another body and you want to calculate how it's all going to end up, you need 7 measurements. And one of these measurements is called argument of perigee. And so I use that as a metaphor about a relationship. Even in weightlessness, carnations bloom. In that window box of a greenhouse called Oasis, bolted onto Space Station Mir, a most bearable lightness of being, Russian cosmonauts hang out. It sort of relaxes you better than aluminum and faxes. But while the carnations bloomed, they never bore seed. No argument parted us, but argument of perigee, a precession of circumstances, the diverging orbits of 2 lives, 2 spaceships that pass in the night. Now, poets are famous and infamous for their romantic affairs, but curiously, they never seem to want to write about their divorces. And this poem takes the flight of Apollo the 13 as a metaphor for the disintegration of relationship and divorce. And it's titled, of course, Houston, We Have a Problem. Between moon and earth, two bodies fall through space, trapped in this broken structure. Bus B, voltage falling. First, M spike. Now, falling voltage. Two bodies, deprived of purpose, dead in their coupling, plummet through a darkening space. Oxygen tank 2, 0. Oxygen tank 1, pressure falling. How frail is this foil, sheet or sleep, as we fall through it, emptying tonight. We keep home, home, down to earth. This rejoining is our parting, with feet on the ground. And one year, the McGregor Poetry Festival invited people to submit poems about the heart of the moon. And I've written a poem about the literal geological heart of the moon. So here goes. It's called The Man in the Moon. Seismologists, selenologists told the man in the moon, every 14 days when you furthest, when you closest, deep moonquakes peak 1,000 kilometers down in the heart. So far, so faint, they tremors no one can feel. You said, it is ended. I leave. No Eurydice followed me, only emptiness. The man in the moon, mooning around, found a world without sound, with only light and dark. Here is no wind nor water, only dust and rock. There is no love on the symbol of love, nor grief. In this place there is but sky and stone stung by meteors. Unlike Lot's wife, I could not look back. Molten salt burned within. And the last poem I selected for tonight's reading is the last poem in the collection Cosmonauts, Dirt and Heaven, which you can order from the exclusive books in Cabinet Square or on Loot or Take a Lot. And this poem is called, it's an ode to celebrate our square kilometre array. I dedicate it to Bernie Faneroff and Justin Jonas, who made the SKO possible. 64 pylons hold up 64 ears, stitched together with threads of light, listening to the far side of our Milky Way, or blinking in sync for correlator computers huddled inside their Faraday cage, listening to the edgeless edges of a universe with no center, expanding waves washing over stars in the swirling arms of galaxies, listening to whispers from a pulsating vacuum, quantums of oscillating energy, murmurs of dark matter, listening to ions, twirling in magnetic fields, listening in on the unknown. Well, thank you for listening to the selection of poems, and now I'm at your service if you've got any questions or any comments. Okay.
Thank you, Keith. That was fantastic reading. Could we please just pause a moment and give Keith a round of appreciation, applause for those words. Thank you, Keith. I have a couple of observations, comments, but happy to start us off or pass on to someone else who'd like to ask a question. Okay, I don't see any raised hands, but I just wanted to say, Keith, was very struck by the consistency in the voice, whether it was the earlier poems or the poems about space, astronomy, spaceflight. Very grounded, but at the same time filled with wonder. I like the sequence and the thread. The angels pop up in a couple of the poems. So also just to say the resilience in some of those early poems, felt that and heard that, and it's just a very powerful reading. If I have a question, it would be where can one find those poems, the cancer poems as you called them, and the first two poems that you read?
The cancer poems were published in Stanza, the issue for July 2022, number 26. So the full cycle of the cancer poems is there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to hand over to you, Jacques. I see your hand is raised.
So what I love, Keith, about so many of your poems is the way that a more scientific, more objective way of looking at the world is sort of coupled with a more romantic, sort of poetic way of looking at the world. And so, for instance, in that poem where you write about the first night in prison, which is always one of my favorites, you describe the moon both as photons and also as something that keeps vigil, over the captive. And that's something that I think is very rare. I mean, when I listen to someone like Jacob Bronowski, the Ascent of Man, I have that sense in him, but it's very wonderful the way you have them together. You want to, is something how do you sustain that? Is that something that just comes naturally to you? Does it just come from having been inspired by poetry and science growing up?
Well, it's the shock impact of a trauma on me, in this case, the trauma of being locked up in solitary confinement in detention. And so the most visible things around me were indeed the jail yard floodlights and the moon ethereally shining in. So it was the impact of that made me record it as a poem. I'm glad that it works for others. It's a visual imagery, of course.
And I have that sense also very strongly from all the Cosmonauts Stood in Heaven poems, that you have these different ways of looking at the same time. It's very gorgeous. It's very wonderful to read.
Thanks. I was wanting to show that you can use, as well as the poet's classic use of the moon and the stars for romance, you can actually use spacecraft and space flight as metaphors for romance and affairs and so on, which I try to do there.
Yeah, thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions for Keith? Okay, well, I can continue the riff that you began, Jacques, or just I was likewise struck by the specificity in the poems, bringing in the historical details or the scientific details, always very sharply observed, and I appreciate that very much about the poems, because it's always interesting. I always feel like I'm learning something, and yeah, you're very present in the poems, Keith. So just appreciation, and I hope that yeah, that the poems find many readers, because yeah, they're just excellent poems. So I'm rambling, and yeah, if anyone has anything else to say, now is your chance to Georgia, go for it.
Hi, and hello, Keith. It was so wonderful to hear you read tonight. And I was really transported, especially by your Cosmonaut poems. And what came to mind was I remember being very young, sort of 5 years old, and somebody had given, I was living in Zimbabwe at that stage, and somebody had given me a magazine that was talking about the Cape Town Observatory, which apparently had a really good telescope at that point, and it's probably 1976, something like that. And I decided that I wanted to go there. And eventually we got there, but it was 1979, and that's when they decided that the light pollution was too much, and you couldn't, it just wasn't functioning in the way it was anymore. And it was so interesting tonight. I hadn't thought of that for decades, and I was just transported into that place where I felt so much wonder at that age. And I remember looking out of my window before I even knew what the moon was, and just being absolutely transfixed by it. And your poems are so inspiring because they take me into that curiosity again, and into the depths of those places that I'd forgotten. And I just so thank you for that this evening. It's been incredible. And my question would be, when did your fascination start with space? I mean, what was the first thing? Can you remember?
Well, I've always been excited about astronomy and space flight since I was 10 years old. And back in 1957, the Soviet Union, that is Russia, launched the first artificial satellite called Sputnik,
Yeah.
which was a huge sensation.
Mm.
Cape Townians gathered on Signal Hill after sunset to see what looked like an airliner at night moving slowly across the sky from west to east, but it wasn't an airliner, it was a Sputnik upper stage rocket over there. Very, very exciting. And you see, it was, the astronomers all had to move away from observatory to Sutherland, but today, with the internet age, they moved back to Cape Town because they just download from the telescope.
Okay, yeah.
Sitting in a revamped room in the observatory over there, what they call an intelligent observatory. So that way they get the best of both worlds, living in Cape Town, but the clear dark skies of Sutherland. And I've also visited with my wife Bernie the radio telescope, the SKA, just outside Carnarvon on its open day in the July vac over there, which also is quite moving to see, and all the electronics over there. I managed to get a Faraday cage into my poem, but I struggled and couldn't get Fourier transform into a poem, which is the mathematics involved in converting the faint radio waves from the other end of the universe into data over there. But anyway,
wow,
I could, in that poem over there, what Africans will call a praise poem and what the British will call an ode to there. I didn't read tonight, but I've written odes to the space station and to all the astronaut crew living on it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Keith, and so moving. Thank you.
Glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you, Georgia. And thank you, Keith. Such an honor and pleasure to hear your work at the Red Wheelbarrow. Thank you. We're going to take a 5-minute break, as per usual, and yeah, we'll be back then at 8:30 on my clock, South African time. So the open mic, you can read your own stuff. You can read poems by other poets. Yeah, it's usually a lot of fun. So hope to catch you after the break. I'm going to end the recording and we'll take it from there.